What if everything you believed about yourself, your dreams, your career, your identity, wasn't truly you, but a mask carefully crafted to survive, to be accepted, to fit in? Carl Jung believed that the first half of life is often lived under illusion, shaped by family expectations, social roles, and unconscious projections. You play the part society gave you. You succeed, or you fail. But one day you wake up with a haunting question. Whose life am I really living? Jung called this the midlife crisis, but it's not a breakdown, it's an awakening. In this video, we'll walk you through how your first 40 years may have been a lie, and how the second half can finally be the truth. The persona, the mask, you mistake for you. We are born as raw essence, undefended, unshaped, and completely ourselves. But the world does not receive us as we are. It asks us to conform, to adjust, to fit into a mold. And so, from an early age, we begin crafting a mask, the persona. The persona is not our true face. It is the version of ourselves we learn to present to others so we may be accepted, praised, and protected. It is the smile we wear when we feel like crying. It is the polite agreement when something inside us resists. It is the achievement-driven identity, the charming role, the socially desirable image we project to gain approval and avoid rejection. Carl Jung called the persona a necessary interface between the individual and society. Without it, we would struggle to function in the social world. It allows us to adapt, to belong, to participate in the structures of family, school, and work. But what begins as a survival strategy often becomes a prison. Over time, we forget that the persona is merely a mask. We begin to identify with it. We confuse our role with our essence. We think, I am the successful one, the good girl, the dependable son, the rebel, the caregiver, the intellectual. And yet, behind these personas, the authentic self waits silently, longing to be seen, aching to be expressed. The danger lies in the over-identification with the persona. When we invest all our energy into maintaining the mask, the parts of ourselves that do not fit into this image are repressed. The wildness, the grief, the creativity, the vulnerability. These rejected aspects sink into the unconscious, forming the shadow. To the outside world, we may appear composed and accomplished, but internally a quiet suffocation begins. Anxiety, numbness, a vague sense that something essential is missing. We may achieve everything we thought we wanted, only to realize we do not recognize the person we've become. The persona is hollow when it becomes a substitute for the soul. Jung warned that individuation, the journey toward becoming whole, requires us to differentiate the persona from the true self. This does not mean we discard the persona entirely, but that we see through it. We use it consciously rather than being used by it unconsciously. The moment we start asking, "Who am I beneath the mask?" is the moment the soul begins to stir. It is not an easy question. In fact, it often invites crisis, as we feel torn between the need for authenticity and the fear of rejection. But this tension is sacred. It is the beginning of transformation. To reclaim your true self, you must face the discomfort of letting go of who you were trained to be. You must allow the mask to slip, not in rebellion, but in reverence. For only when the mask falls can the face beneath it breathe again. The persona may win you the world, but it is the self that will return you to your soul. Childhood conditioning, the wounds that shape you were not born with shame. You did not come into this world believing you were too much, or not enough. Those beliefs were given to you, drop by drop, by the world that raised you. Childhood is not only a time of wonder and play, it is also the first battlefield of the soul. Family, religion, school, culture, they all pour their expectations into the vessel of your being before you even understand what a self is. You absorb it all, not because it is true, but because your survival depends on it. A child does not question love. A child questions themselves. If love is withheld unless you are obedient, quiet, perfect, you learn to perform. If affection comes only when you suppress your anger, your curiosity, your truth, you learn to hide. If approval is given when you betray your needs, you learn to disconnect from them altogether. These early adaptations are not conscious choices. They are instinctive strategies for belonging. You shrink, contort, or inflate parts of yourself to secure attachment. To be loved, you must not be fully you, and so roles are born. The caretaker, the achiever. The invisible one, the peacemaker, the rebel. Each role is a mask carved from necessity. Each one is a wound dressed as identity. Jung understood this as the shaping of the ego under the influence of external forces. Still soft and forming, learns to split. Acceptable traits are polished and presented, while unacceptable ones are exiled into the unconscious. This is how the shadow begins to take shape, composed not of evil, but of forbidden truth. Culture adds more layers. Religion tells you what is holy and what is sinful. School rewards obedience more than originality. Even gender, race, and class carry unspoken scripts. You learn who you're allowed to be and who you must never become. And yet, deep within, the soul remembers. The soul remembers the wildness of your laughter before shame taught you to hold it in. It remembers the rage you swallowed because it frightened those around you. It remembers the tenderness you buried to seem strong. These fragments are not lost. They live within the psyche like seeds, dormant but not dead. But to recover them, you must be willing to question the very foundation upon which your personality rests. The healing journey begins not with blame, but with awareness. It is not about condemning your family or culture, but about seeing clearly how their beliefs have shaped the architecture of your identity. You are not your conditioning. You are not the role you had to play. You are the one who noticed the mask never quite fit. You are the one who hears the inner child whispering through the cracks of your performance. To heal, you must listen. To become whole, you must turn inward and reclaim every part of you that was abandoned to survive. Because survival is not the same as living, and the self you had to hide still longs to come home. Success, but empty. The false summit of the first half. You set out early, full of drive, ambition, and borrowed dreams. Society lays the path like a well-lit staircase. Get the degree, get the job, get the partner, buy the house, earn the praise. You ascend it step by step, fueled by the promise that one day, just over the next hill, you will arrive. You will feel fulfilled. You will feel enough. And then you do arrive. The title is on your business card. The ring is on your finger. The applause echoes from the crowd, but something inside is still quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the aching kind. A silence that sounds like, is this all? This moment, though rarely spoken of, is not failure. It is the psychological threshold between the first half of life and what Carl Jung called the great turning inward. In the first half of life, the ego is king. It must be. We need a stable identity, a structure of self strong enough to function in the world. We need to belong, to build, to prove we can shape our reality. This is the sacred task of ego development, what Jung called the morning of life. But the danger comes when we believe this climb is the summit. We confuse achievement with wholeness. We confuse identity with essence. When success is gained without self-awareness, it becomes a gilded cage. You can have everything and still feel like a stranger in your own skin. You can be admired outwardly and abandoned inwardly. The world sees a winner, but the soul feels unseen. This dissonance is not a mistake. It is a signal. The ego has taken you as far as it can. Now, something deeper stirs beneath the surface. It whispers not of more goals, but of meaning. Not of status, but of substance. Not of performance, but of presence. This is where many experience what we call a midlife crisis. But it is not truly a crisis. It is an initiation. The psyche begins to shift its focus from doing to being, from achievement to authenticity. Jung believed that the second half of life must not be a continuation of the first. It requires a different map. The tasks are no longer outer victories, but inner integrations. The climb becomes a descent, not into despair, but into depth. You begin to ask, who am I when no one is watching? What part of me have I sacrificed for success? What does the soul want, not the ego? These questions are sacred thresholds. They mark the end of striving for approval and the beginning of returning to truth. You are not lost. You are simply being called inward. The summit you reached was never the end, only the false peak. Beyond it lies the real journey, the path of wholeness, the unfolding of the self, the quiet homecoming to who you were before the world told you who to be. The shadow emerges, crisis as a spiritual alarm. It begins quietly, restlessness in the chest, a subtle unease in familiar places. You wake with questions that once never crossed your mind. Why does everything feel numb? Why do I no longer recognize the life I built? Why am I afraid of the silence I used to enjoy? You might call it burnout. Midlife crisis, existential depression. Jung called it the emergence of the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is everything you were told not to be. Everything you repressed to be accepted. Everything you denied to stay loved. In the first half of life, the ego builds a mask, your persona. But behind that carefully curated identity, the castaway parts of you wait. The grief never felt. The anger swallowed. The wild creativity locked in the basement. The longings too dangerous to name. And at midlife, that basement door begins to rattle. Not to punish you, not to ruin you, but to awaken you. You see, the psyche has its own intelligence. It knows when the game of pleasing and pretending has run its course. It sends symptoms as signals: boredom, anxiety, compulsions, addictions, affairs, emotional fatigue, not as dysfunction, but as alarms. You are not breaking down. You are being summoned. This is not a pathology. It is a spiritual initiation. The shadow wants not to harm you, but to be seen. It longs to be brought into consciousness, because until it is, it rules you from the dark. It sabotages your relationships. It fuels your projections. It disguises itself in the people you hate and the traits you judge. As Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. To face the shadow is not to indulge it, but to integrate it. To admit, yes, I have envy. Yes, I carry rage. Yes, I hunger for something more than this tidy life allows. It takes courage to look inward, to turn toward the parts of yourself that feel alien, shameful, or dangerous. But this confrontation is sacred, because what we exile, we cannot heal, and what we reject, we cannot transform. This inner crisis, this unraveling, is not a mistake. It is the moment the soul knocks on the door of your carefully managed life and asks, "Will you let me in now? Will you stop running from yourself? Will you finally become whole, not just good?" It is not easy. The path of shadow work is jagged. You will grieve the illusions that kept you safe. You will rage at the roles you had to play. You will fear the vastness of what you still don't know about yourself. But you will also come alive, because to welcome the shadow is to reclaim your fullness. To meet the crisis is to begin the true journey, not of being better, but of being real. The midlife awakening, breaking the illusion. Midlife does not come with a warning. It creeps in quietly, then suddenly breaks the surface. Not as a whisper, but as a rupture. What once felt solid begins to tremble. The job that once gave you pride now feels empty. The roles you've played, partner, parent, achiever, start to blur. Even your thoughts seem foreign, your desires scattered across a shifting landscape. This is not madness, this is awakening. Carl Jung saw midlife not as a descent into irrelevance, but a sacred turning point. Not the end of your story, but the middle chapter, where the plot truly thickens. In the first half of life, you are taught to build a name, a reputation, a family, a future. You follow maps given to you by others. You chase meaning in accomplishments, status, security. But somewhere between the ages of 35 and 55, the soul knocks harder. And the ego, the structure you've carefully built to hold your life together, begins to crack. These cracks are not flaws, they are openings. Suddenly you begin to ask, who am I really? Whose dreams am I chasing? Whose voice is directing my life? And the most terrifying question of all, what if the life I've built is not truly mine? This is the breaking of the illusion that happiness can be manufactured through external success, that identity is permanent, that roles equal meaning. The mask begins to fall, the scaffolding starts to shake. You may try to cling to old certainties, to fix, to push harder, to numb the discontent. But the psyche cannot be silenced once it has tasted the truth. Something deeper is calling you, And here, in the quiet rubble of your former self, a deeper truth stirs. Living in reaction, you begin to move with integrity, even when no one is watching. You begin to trust the inner compass. You begin to live as a soul in motion. This is not a destination, it is a continual unfolding, a lifelong dance between the known and the unknown. And it begins the moment you stop asking, "Who should I be?" and start listening to the question, "Who am I beneath all I've become?" That is the call. And now, finally, you are ready to answer it. Dreams, symbols, and synchronicity, messages from the unconscious. When the surface of life begins to tremble, when your plans no longer hold and reason feels thin, you may begin to notice something else, something quieter, more mysterious, and far more intelligent. Dreams that stir at night, symbols that appear again and again. Strange coincidences that seem too meaningful to dismiss. Carl Jung called this deeper language the voice of the unconscious. And when the ego is no longer enough to carry your life, the unconscious begins to speak, not in logic, not in words, but in images, symbols, metaphors, in dreams that confuse you, in encounters that shake you, in moments that seem fated, though no one else understands why. To Jung, these are not accidents, they are messages. Your soul is always speaking, not to your mind, but to your essence, not to direct you, but to awaken you. Dreams are the nightly messengers of your inner world. They bypass your defenses. They bring what's been exiled to your attention, your desires, fears, unlived potentials, and wounded fragments, and they do so in rich, symbolic language. You dream of drowning, not because you need swimming lessons, but because something within is overwhelmed. You dream of a locked door, not because of a forgotten key, but because part of you longs for access to a buried truth. In the symbolic realm, everything means more than it seems. A lion is not just a lion. A child is not just a child. A shadow is not just darkness, it is the part of you waiting to be seen. And then there is synchronicity, Jung's word for those uncanny events that defy logic yet feel deeply personal. You think of someone you haven't seen in years, and they call. You struggle with a question, and the answer arrives in a book title, a stranger's comment, a line in a song. Coincidence? Perhaps. But Jung taught us to listen, to slow down and consider that life is not random. The universe, like the unconscious, may be trying to enter your awareness, not to control your choices, but to align you with meaning. Synchronicity is the outer world mirroring your inner reality. It is a reminder that your journey is not solitary, that something wiser than your ego is at work, nudging, guiding, shaping. To live in dialogue with the unconscious is to stop dismissing your dreams, to stop ignoring the gut feeling, to start asking, what is this moment trying to show me? This is not superstition, it is symbolic awareness. It is the return to a sacred way of seeing, where life is no longer a series of tasks, but a conversation with the soul. So write down your dreams, track the patterns, follow the signs. Trust that the images arising within are not distractions, but directions. Because beneath the noise of the world, your deeper self is always speaking. And when you finally begin to listen, you remember what it means to live awake, embracing the inner feminine, masculine, anima and animus integration. Deep within every soul lives the other, in every man, a hidden woman, in every woman, a hidden man. Not literal, but energetic, symbolic, the anima and animus. Jung taught that these inner figures are more than ideas. They are bridges to wholeness, mirrors of the unlived, the repressed, the divine within. To ignore them is to remain incomplete. To integrate them is to become truly alive. The anima in a man is not simply softness or emotion. She is his gateway to intuition, creativity, and soul. When unintegrated, she appears in projection, the mysterious woman, the seductive muse, the perfect partner he obsesses over. But she is not out there. She is within, waiting to be honored, felt, and embraced. The animus in a woman is not just logic or assertiveness. He is her capacity to speak, to act, to stand rooted in inner authority. When unintegrated, he becomes harsh judgment, inner criticism, the disembodied voice of patriarchy echoing in her mind. But he too is within. waiting to be balanced, softened, and made conscious. When we do not recognize these energies in ourselves, we seek them in others. We fall in love not with the person, but with our lost parts wearing their face. This is why romantic love can feel so intoxicating, and why it so often breaks under the weight of its illusion. But when we turn inward, when we begin the dialogue, something sacred happens. The man reclaims his soul through tenderness, receptivity, and emotion. He no longer fears vulnerability, he finds power in it. He listens not only with his mind, but with his heart. The woman reclaims her truth through strength, clarity, and voice. She no longer seeks permission, she speaks from her own center. She no longer waits to be chosen, she chooses herself. Together, the inner feminine and masculine form the sacred union. The hieros gamos Jung spoke of. An inner marriage that does not depend on external validation. Creativity deepens, relationships mature. Decisions arise not from reaction, but balance. To integrate anima and animus is not to become androgynous, it is to become whole. To live from the full range of your being. So ask yourself, where have I silenced my inner woman or banished my inner man? What traits do I admire or fear in the opposite sex? Where do I project rather than possess? The journey begins not in another's arms, but in your own reflection. And when the union is made within, love becomes no longer a search, but a sacred sharing. Death of the old self, rebirth of the real. Before the new can be born, the old must die. Not a physical death, but something deeper. The death of the false self. The unraveling of the identity you clung to for safety. The shedding of the masks you wore for love. This is the most sacred and painful part of the journey. You've worked so hard to become someone. You built a name, a story, a reputation. You earned applause. You chased dreams. But something inside you always knew. It wasn't the whole story. And now the soul demands truth. Carl Jung called this the ego death. A necessary unraveling that feels like breaking but is actually becoming. You mourn what you thought you needed. You grieve the person you used to be. There is no shortcut through this grief, only the long walk through darkness where each tear waters the soil of a deeper self. You are not being punished, you are being stripped of what was false, borrowed, or outdated. This is the cocoon before the flight, the crucible before the gold, the tomb that is also a womb. The soul does not emerge in comfort, but in surrender. And when you finally release the old narrative, when you let the identity die, you find something astonishing on the other side. Stillness, depth, peace, not the peace of having it all figured out, but the peace of no longer pretending. Here, the real self begins to rise. Quiet, grounded, alive, not needing to prove, to chase, to earn, simply being raw and radiant. You no longer ask, what do they want me to be? You ask, what is truest in me? This is rebirth, not into perfection, but into presence. The ego may resist. It may panic. It may mourn. Let it. Because what emerges after ego death is not smaller, but vast. Not fragile, but rooted. Not empty, but whole.